The origin of the piece is interesting in that it was actually not originally intended to be a choral piece. When I first set out to compose a proto version of this, it was intended as an opera based on the life of a Jewish Messiah figure, Shabbatai Tzvi, who was a medieval Jew who believed he was the Messiah and was a sort of self-proclaimed Messiah. And he went around the Ottoman Empire proselytizing his vision, and by many Jews was actually embraced as the Messiah. And ultimately he betrayed them when he was brought in by the Sultan and told that he would either be sent to prison or have to convert, and he decided to convert. And so he kind of let his whole community, all of his acolytes, down. And I thought this was quite an interesting story, and a figure that people don't really know very much about. I didn't feel like there was quite enough material to make an opera around Shabbatai Tzvi's life. And so I kind of put the opera aside. At the same time, Cantori approached me about writing a new piece for them. And I thought I might borrow some of the material from that piece and maybe consider the idea of messianism more broadly. So Shabbatai Tzvi was but one of many messianic figures that's appeared throughout history, prior to Jesus, during Jesus' life, and throughout all time. And so I thought it would be interesting to explore the notion of what it means to find a leader, to put your faith in this leader, and then what happens. In some cases, the leader delivers, by some people's estimation, and there are still followers, by the way, of Shabbatai Tzvi, even 450 years later. And some leaders don't deliver, and what happens in those cases. And so I thought I would write a piece that kind of addressed the issue of messianism as a whole. When I was compiling the text for this piece, I spent a lot of time doing research. I wanted to make sure that the piece came across in a somewhat balanced way. I wanted to address figures, or use figures who were unequivocally good, and figures who are unequivocally evil, and figures who are somewhere in the middle, and kind of mash them all together in a way that causes you to maybe reassess where they actually stand. The idea is not to say that any of these people is good or evil. I'm not interested really in appraising any of them on an individual basis. It was more of an idea of looking just beyond the kind of stereotypical leader that you see. It was around 2012, 2013 when I started writing the piece, which was obviously during the Obama presidency. And one of the things I noticed, which was interesting about the Obama presidency, is that many of my more liberal or progressive friends and colleagues who were extremely gung-ho Obama before his election and during the early part of his presidency had started to lose some of their hope or lose some of their idealism about his tenure and what he had accomplished while he was in office. And I found that to be somewhat interesting, that they would kind of rally behind this guy and then turn their backs in a funny way, saying that he hadn't quite delivered on the message that he had shared, and that was the premise of his candidacy and his campaign. And so I wanted to incorporate Obama into the piece directly, and I thought it would be interesting to parallel what was happening with Obama with other messianic figures throughout history, and kind of explore their rise and fall is the wrong word, but kind of explore their trajectory overall. I also wanted to explore texts from all throughout history. I thought it would be interesting to kind of cull them from as many disparate places as possible. Again, to give it that kind of timeless quality, to give it that sense of like, boy, this has been happening over and over and over again in all different ways, in many different places with many different groups of people, large and small. Some of the figures are obviously, world leaders. Some of them are small leaders with a small cult following. I also wanted to make sure that I not only included texts from the leaders themselves, but also included texts about the leaders, of how people who were contemporaries of these leaders were commenting on what was happening in their own time. So there are passages where contemporaries of Abraham Lincoln are denouncing his actions in his own time, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of pull those in to provide some historical context. The arc of the piece, the narrative, is again to kind of trace the rise and fall of a Messiah figure, but not just one. It's all of them, right? They all kind of have this trajectory of they grow, they flourish, and then history takes them in one direction or the other. The piece is not as much about the leaders as it seems. The chorus is acting sort of as an analog for society, in a way. And they are the sheep, right? They are the flock, they are the followers. And it's really more of an examination of them and how they're reacting to what he's saying, and how they're either parroting what he's saying, or commenting on what the leaders are saying, or shunning the leader and what they're saying. And it's really less of a comment on the messiahs themselves and more on the notion of messianism. The piece has 10 movements. That was very deliberate. For most of the piece, the chorus sings in Latin in a way to give it a kind of distance from what from our present time, and in a sense, I kind of want the audience to not fully understand what they're saying in the same way that the flock doesn't quite fully understand what they're saying. And in the end, the very last text actually is in English that the chorus sings. It's the only time that the chorus sings in English over the course of the piece. And they sing ultimately well, I'll leave it for you to hear what they sing. But they kind of sing the moral of the piece, if there is a moral. And it's as if finally they really understand and they see what's happening. And they have their own voice.